Hello, my name is Jack Heritage, practical karate instructor.
And I am Pat Woodward, amateur enthusiast in a number of different martial arts styles.
And welcome to Armchair Combatives Podcast. So today we're going to kind of look a little bit more at weapon work and weapon styles and all of the kind of stuff that falls into that category. And I think I'd like to kick this one off today, Pat, by kind of asking about your experience. You've done a lot more weapon work than I have, and it'd be interesting to see like what got you started in it, what interested you about it, and we'll go from there.
Nice one, thanks, Jack. My experience of it has come almost exclusively from a place called Total Martial Arts over in Coventry. I was lucky enough to practice predominantly one-on-one with the chief instructor there, a guy called Lucky Madahar. And it essentially began because I kind of dallied around with a few martial arts, Wing Chun predominantly. This kind of comes back to what we said in a previous episode regarding, there was a lot of like karate and stuff in my area, and I kind of didn't want to give it a go just because of certain stigmas. And a friend of mine recommended, if you want to do something really out there, you should practice a screamer. And a screamer is essentially stick work. So you fight with these kind of raton canes. They're about 2 feet in length. And he kind of said, if you want to do something that's like really out there, just practice a screamer, because I think it was purely a case of it was the most out there martial art he could think of off the top of his head. So went online, found this place over in Coventry, went over, tried it out, and I really fell in love with it. I fell in love with the variety of styles that were being taught there. There were various things like, you've got your Filipino martial art, you've got Panantukan, which is a kind of Filipino boxing style, except it incorporates a lot more work with the elbows and the knees. So it's kind of in a similar vein to Muay Thai, but I think Panantukan is much more of a toolbox of really fast, aggressive self-protection ideals. It's very much something that was designed for the streets rather than the battlefield, I feel. I'm obviously oversimplifying. I found that I really just fell into these really nice flow patterns that you can achieve with the knife, with the stick, with the long blade, which is kind of basically what comes after the stick. The stick teaches you that kind of thing, and I just really enjoyed the system, and I really enjoyed the kind of philosophy behind the system. Obviously, it's not from Filipino martial arts itself, but I really enjoy, as you know, the quote from Morihei Ueshiba, who's the founder of Aikido, and he says in one of his memoirs, kind of thing. At first, I learned there were 1,000 techniques. Then I learned there was one technique, and then I learned there were no techniques. And I think that kind of weirdly mirrors what I learned from the Filipino martial arts, in the sense of there's a lot of drills, there's a lot of patterns, there's a lot of really nice exercises and things in there that get you used to flowing and moving, and not just kind of the static punch stop, kick stop, cut stop, kind of these motions that you see in kind of other things. It's that thing of every motion can be moved into another motion, every redirection can be turned into something else, and I think it just really resonated with me. I really kind of hit into it really fast. I love that about the art. I enjoy. There's the potential to just kind of go on and on and on, like rather than doing 30 seconds of this, 30 seconds of that, with the right partner, with the right techniques, with the right drills, you can flow until you drop, kind of thing. And I think that flow, that understanding the way that your body moves, the way that your body doesn't move, the way that your opponent's body moves and doesn't move, that I feel is a real gem to master, and something that has really shaped my style of martial arts.
Absolutely. We see that based on, how we've sparred together and different things that we've done, is you are a very flowy kind of person in that you always look to move on from the last technique was not the last technique, it was the beginning of the next technique, which I really like that. And I think, especially like styles like karate, we can do more with that. especially when you look at like things like traditional karate and stuff, we often get that stop start kind of thing. It's like big punch, hold it there for about 10 seconds, and then you move on. Okay, bit of an over exaggeration, but you get what I mean, right? Whereas
Oh
that
yeah.
flow, especially in combat, it's really important. And that, this goes for like sparring, and it also goes for self protection. Like in self protection, you don't want to throw one shot, stand there for 5 seconds, going, I wonder if I got him. They're going to do something else. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting that you just said was you were talking about like how the stick and the knife and they have similar kind of underlying principles, right? And I thought that was really interesting because when I got the opportunity to train with you and you were showing me some of your Filipino martial arts like eskrima and stuff, one of the things I thought was really interesting was the underlying principles for what you were doing were very, very similar to that of karate's. It's just there was a slightly different expression of them.
I'm a big believer of you can kind of dress it up however you want, but it's one of those things where I think people all over the world figured out these principles a long time ago, and it's kind of to the Japanese it looks like this, to the Filipinos it looks like this, to the English it looks like this, to the Americans it looks like that, to the Thai it looks like this. Every people throughout history have a certain have kind of come across these types of things. There's
Yeah,
only there's a lot of ways you can throw a punch, jab or a cross or a back fist or a hammer or a knife hand or anything like that. Lots of different ways, but at the end of the day, as I kind of said in my previous point, there's only a certain number of ways that the human body can generate that power. And something that I did really appreciate about learning the Filipino martial arts is the knife work does translate to the open hands, and those the attacks that you can do kind of teach you the angles of the body. They do teach you the footwork. They do teach you you can strike in this way because a knife cut to say if you aim a knife cut to the side of the neck, you could easily translate that to hammer fist to the jaw kind of thing.
sure.
And
Yeah, yeah.
it's that thing of it's building that muscle memory with the use of, let's call it, an applicative tool rather than just standing there and doing it on the empty air or on a pad, which I'm not saying are inferior methods of training by any stretch of the imagination. I've just always found that kind of having that kind of implement in your hand, you have a bit of weight, you have a bit of an understanding of how to move, and you kind of work that precision. And as soon as you are then shown how what you learn with the knife or the stick translates to the empty hands, which isn't always very obvious, I will say. You do have to go looking for it, even under
Yeah.
instruction sometimes. But I think that's kind of a really intelligent way of making people who are adept at self defense, not just self protection.
Yeah.
Because if you're in a bar fight or you're in the street and you can grab a broom handle, or I've seen there's a guy called Peter Vekov who he's running Sami X International, who are they're kind of like a self defense conglomerate. They do seminars, they do that kind of thing. Really, really well educated, really, really dynamic instructor. He was doing a seminar in Paris recently where like he was using a magazine to strike
Hmm.
somebody and then control the head, because it's kind of what difference really does a stick have compared to a rolled up magazine or a roll of cling film or tin foil or a broom handle. Like these are all applicable tools if you're in the middle of a self-defense situation. And within reason, I think it's always better to try and arm yourself against an obvious attacker, somebody who is definitively gunning for you, than to necessarily try and take them on with the open hand, because any advantage is an advantage. Obviously, we get into kind of legal ramifications. When I kind of say arm yourself as best as possible, I'm not saying if you get jumped, then immediately cross the street, go into the restaurant and ask for their biggest meat cleaver, because
Yeah, yeah,
that's gonna get you wrong. But it's
yeah.
kind of, if you are able to grab a newspaper, or something like a thick magazine to defend yourself, if you are able to take your belt off and use that as a weapon against to tie up an attacker in ways. Obviously, you see that very much with silat, penchak silat, which is something, again, I was lucky enough to see under Mr. Madahar. These things are all, they give you that little bit of edge. They just add that extra 2, 3, 5, 10% chance of you walking away as unscathed as possible from this kind of confrontation.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things for me, like taking away using weapons and stuff. Obviously, I come from a place where we never really practiced weapon work. It was just something that I've never really like sat down and gone, I want to learn this and I want to do this. But I can really understand how weapons and different things in your environment can be used in self protection, even if you have like no experience of using a weapon or how to hit things or whatever it might be. Like it's a really good way of just making distance. Like one of the things that we often say is like if somebody's trying to get close to you and you're not too proficient with any sort of hand-to-hand combat, but picking up a chair and just basically pushing them away with a chair, it puts a distance between you and that person. So whatever that thing might be, like you say, it could be a newspaper, it could be anything. You're just swinging it around saying "stay back." Okay, it might be a slight what's the word I'm trying to use?
Deterrent?
Uh, yeah, a slight deterrent. Yeah, a slight deterrent from them wanting to get in too close. It's like simple things like that make learning how to use any form of like blunt weaponry or even even knife work, in my opinion, is really useful because if you have like a basic understanding of how to like throw around and proficiently use one blunt weapon, you can apply it to a lot of things, like you just said. And that was like what I said earlier. Like that's what surprised me about weapon work is that like the principles are all kind of similar to everything else that we do in hand-to-hand combat. Anyway, it's very much so. This is where you're aiming for. This is the angle you want to be at because this is a beneficial angle because of this, this, and this. You also got to think about what's in the way. Is there an arm in the way? Yeah, might want to move that, mate. But you're still, instead of hitting him with a hand, you're going to hit him with a blunt weapon, or you're going to hit him with a knife, or whatever it might be. The translatability of it, I think, is really important. And I think even if you were to just do weapon work every now and again in a dojo that you might run or whatever it might be, if you work in a club that only does hand to hand, having that weapon work every now and again is probably enough. Like you'll probably find that your students will actually know more than they think they know.
Yeah, completely. Well, I mean, you take necessarily the drill that we were practicing the other day. So when you've got your rattan, your eskrima, your stick, whatever you want to call it. The way I was always taught to kind of help with power generation was you pull the stick right back, you pull the hand that's holding it right back to your shoulder to then strike, because then it's, as you say, it's all of the principles we already know from striking. You activate the hip, you're using the entirety of the arm, you're letting that arm unfurl, which again generates force. On an even simple principle, if you think about the motion now, if you've got something in your hand and you pull that hand back to your shoulder to wind the weapon up, you put the other hand there. That's a head guard. You're
Yeah,
guarding. You straight away. You're learning how to guard your head.
yeah,
So I
absolutely.
think it's one of those where, don't get me wrong, I certainly don't have all the answers. I don't think anyone really has all the answers. I think something that really kind of denotes a practitioner versus a student versus a martial artist is kind of, do you have the knowledge at your disposal to go looking for these things and start actually picking apart the drills that you do and go, actually, I recognize this position. Actually, I recognize this motion. Actually, I recognize this. And I think you're completely right. If you take a club, any club doing any martial art, and you introduce the stick or the knife or any other form of weapon, the bokken from that you'd learn in aikido or kendo. I think that if you are already practicing a martial art, you will have an understanding already that you didn't necessarily know that you had.
Yeah,
And all Filipino martial arts does is teach it from the other direction. You teach the weapon work, you get that framework, you get there with the applicative tool, you get the procedures of, like, you need to focus on a cutting angle, you need to focus on a striking angle, whatever it might be, and then you take it away and you go, and now this is how you do it with the empty hand. And I, for one, have experienced more than once. We'll do a drill with a stick. We'll be drilling like this. We'll go for a lock or whatever it might be, and I'm like, yeah, cool, that's really nice. And then you get the sticks are taken away, and you get shown how it translates into the empty hands, and you're like, oh, cool. So actually, just because I was having a stick in my hand, I thought I was learning this kind of crossbody lock. In actuality, I've just learned a really solid armbar drill in half the time because I'm having
yeah,
fun. I'm using. I'm not thinking of, like, oh, I need to put my feet here. I need to do this. I need to do that. You get that. There's an energy off of you can hear the clacking of the sticks. You can feel that contact. Your energy gets a bit up, and you realize actually, I've just learned, whatever it might be. I've just learned this armbar. I've just learned this stroking set in half the time. Go me. Like, it's it's one of those where I'm not gonna sit here and say the weapon work is ever something I would like to use on the street.
Okay.
I would I think it's one of those where if I'm ever involved in a situation where I have a knife in my hand or I have anything, maybe picking up a magazine or anything is, that's kind of like, that's just giving me that edge. But if I'm ever in a situation where I have to use knife arts with a knife, something's gone really wrong.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's really getting down to the life or death, which is, it's a somber thought. I don't like to dwell on it in my seminars. I don't want to necessarily dwell on it here, but it's one of those where whenever I teach, and I know you can back me up on this, whenever I teach the weapon work, I do say I really hope you never have to use it.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. It's a really interesting thing though. Like one of the things you just mentioned resonated with me a little bit. And it's when you said about you found that going from using a weapon and then them translating the drill that you were running into a open hand thing. And it made me think about something that I do. And it's interesting because when we talk about power generation, we often use the double hip. That is something that I've got from Peter Constantine and Jeff Thompson. Those guys, really great martial artists. A lot of the stuff that we do is based on their principles, being passed down through different people. But it's interesting because when you try and teach a karateka, especially one that's been doing it a long time, how to change from doing their normal version of a punch into using the double hip, is that you look at it and you're like, okay, so all you got to do is you throw one hip forward and then the other one trails round, you delay the arm and hit. For somebody that's been doing that a while, you understand how that works and you're like, okay, I get the mechanics, I understand what I'm doing. But for newbies, what I actually find I do is I take it into the context of you're holding something. Like one of the things I often use is we talk about holding a ball. And if you're going to throw a ball, the first thing that everybody does, like I'll just be like, show me how you throw a ball. First thing they do, they throw their hip forward, they put their arm back, and then they use the momentum of the throw of the explosion forward to then throw the ball. And it would be really interesting to see if teaching the double hip would actually be more beneficial doing it the other way around and starting with that physical object, whether that's a stick or whether that's a ball or whatever it is, and seeing if that actually helped inform the movement that we're trying to get to happen.
Completely. And I think it just very much comes back to what are our kids taught to do? And it's very much 99% of kids know how to throw a ball. 99% of kids know how to kick a football. I was taught to, I say taught, I was forced, let's say, to play rugby at school. And it's kind of, so when people go for the takedown, how many people immediately go for the rugby tackle because they learned it in school?
Absolutely, yeah.
I played rugby twice a week for 3 months of the year for 10 years. So, it's in there. That imagine if you could put that level into your martial arts, right?
Sure. Yeah.
2 hours, 3 times a week, 10 years, like black belt straight away.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
And it's one of those where you then teach the kids. So you can teach the kids from like, how do you throw a ball? They know. You then take it into the context of like, you take it to the weapon work. I'll teach you how to use the stick. Okay, now we're going to go to the open hands. Let's show me how you hit with the stick. Bam, that's a hammer fist. Show me how you defend. Bang, that's a back fist. One of the reasons why I feel so comfortable telling people, I do a lot of, I've done a lot of martial arts. I do a lot of martial arts, is because you figure out, or at least I figured out at a certain point, that there's nobody with a completely unique playbook. And if they do have a completely unique playbook, you have to figure out why. A really good example of this, right, it would be Aikido. Now, I can already hear the keyboards clicking away the second I mention Aikido. And Aikido is one of those arts where, so I've read the art piece, which is Ishiba's kind of treatise on the art, and in there he says Aikido is 90% striking. I'm paraphrasing, but he says, whenever you see the Aikido online, Don't Google Steven Seagal. Whenever you see the Aikido online, you you rarely see a punch. You rarely see, you see maybe the UK, the guy who's receiving the technique, you might see him punch or him thrust with a knife or cut with a sword. But the guy who's doing the technique, just, it's this kind of, it looks awful on camera because it's this really lackadaisical, just sweep to the side and, the guy is suddenly 20 meters away. And
Yeah,
Aikido was something that I had to experience. And I think in Aikido are some really groundbreaking methods and ways to understand how the body balances, how the head kind of leads where the body is worked, how the head leads center of gravity, how you disrupt that center of gravity, and at the same time, there was a very innate understanding that none of this is ever going to go my way. You know,
yeah.
I I'm never I'm never I'm never gonna meet somebody who's going to perfect because the guy I was training under very he was explaining it like the sword cut could be anything. It's the same logic as the Filipino martial arts. The sword cut could simulate someone hitting you with a bat or a pipe. The knife thrust is somebody trying to get you with a bottle or hit you over the head with a bottle, and it's kind of nobody's ever going to hit you over. No, nobody's ever going to just do this kind of straight, kind of rock'em sock'em robot arm right down on the head. And it's one of those where if you never drill it live, you'll never know if it works. Or maybe
This,
not necessarily. You'll never know if it
yeah,
works. You'll never know if you've got it.
this is
Do
exactly
you
the thing
understand
that I
how it
was going to
works?
just like bring up was that I think where a lot of martial arts actually fail, especially when they're looking at their practicality or their usefulness in self protection, is that they often have really good principles. They often have quite good techniques. They just don't drill it or practice it in a way that can make it live. And there is a hell of a lot in the transitional things that happen in combat. There's a lot of things that happen in the mess of combat that you can't simulate in a drill. Like, people move, funnily enough. They're not going to stand still. They're also not going to let you throw them. They're going to try and resist. They're going to try and grab you back. They're going to try and push you, pull you. They could punch you. They could try and gouge your eye out if they fancied it. The point is, I think in order to make Aikido, as an example, I know this happens in a lot of martial arts, more practical, is you need to build in those resistances, those counters, and all those different things that could happen. But it has to be organic. It can't be a forced counter. You know what I mean? Like, this person will definitely 100% of the time do this. And I think that can kind of come back into the like any form of martial art. And this is where I kind of want to take the conversation now. Is based on your experience of doing knife arts, like a screamer, or weapon arts rather, is probably a better term for it. Is
Mm.
do you think in general that they are applicable to real life self protection based on the way that they're taught?
I think yes and no,
Okay.
because I think there's very much an understanding of. I'm gonna have to really pick my words again so that we don't get kind of that influx of let's call it the influx of opinion. Not that we don't want your criticism, guys, but it's just yeah.
But yeah, discuss.
There's very much something to be said for like it goes back to what we said in the previous episode about context. So I think yes, if you are going to if you're in an area and you want to learn knife defense, you need to study attacking with the knife, not just defending, because as you learn to attack with the knife, so too does it become harder for your partner to defend with the knife, which means they have to make sure their drill is on point. As they become better at defending the knife, so too do you need to become better at attacking the knife, and it kind of builds and builds and builds and builds. And is very much, I would argue, a thing in any martial art, but so much more prominently in the weapons martial art of the most dangerous man in the room is the man that knows nothing. Because in martial arts, we expect, and it's every martial art. I'm not singling out karate or FMA or anything like that. It's every martial art. It's really, really easy to get into this pattern of, well, I'm expecting this perfect 45-degree slash at my jugular vein because that's how you should do it. That is how you should do it. Do you think Johnny Sixpack on the street with his dad's Stanley knife in his pocket is going to look at you and go, I know what I'm going to do to that ruffian. I'm going to perfectly slash at a 45-degree angle jugular. No, he's going to come at you with a different thing. And it's kind of, you can look at the statistics, you can look at the videos. So many more clubs need to start moving away from the slash mentality and start moving towards defending what's called the sewing machine. So it's essentially like you have one hand on the person you're attacking, and it's very much this kind of rotation of the knife arm in and out, kind of going in at these kind of oblique angles,
Yeah.
aiming for the back or the ribs or that kind of thing, like aiming necessarily for like the chest in general, at the neck, at the face. There are clubs that kind of do it from this kind of like upward slash into the belly. It's good. It's a nice one to start with, but that's not relevant to like modern attacks, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
And I think it's one of those where if you're teaching knife defense, if you're teaching weapon defense, which I think everyone who wants to actually learn about martial arts should experience at some point. Everyone needs to understand what they know and what they don't know, what comes out in those kind of stressful moments. I know you yourself has said when we train with like the aluminium training weapons rather than the wooden ones, there's still that kind of visceral, ah shit, that's a knife, kind of ingrained
Absolutely.
in the
Yeah.
back of your
Yeah.
head. And there's kind of, so I've seen it from a number of different points. It's kind of difficult to define who it comes from. I've seen it done by Peter Vekov. I've seen it done by Paulo Rubio. There's kind of these great kind of reverse blink drills where you have to basically teach yourself to preempt the knife attack almost, because knife attacks happen in, it's not a matter of seconds, it's a fraction of seconds knife attacks can occur,
Yeah.
especially on the street. And so I think that is applicable to living in the UK.
Oh, 100%.
I don't want to necessarily kind of add add gasoline to the fire of the UK as a country of knife wielding hooligans, because it's not the case. Unfortunately, yes, there is a systemic problem with knife attacks in larger cities like London, Birmingham. They are on the rise. There's no way of saying that nicely. But it's the same way. Like I wouldn't teach gun defense in the UK, and I wouldn't
No.
necessarily put time and energy into teaching gun defense in the UK. Our laws prohibit it. There is a fractional margin you're going to meet a gun in the streets, and if you do, give that brother what he wants. Like unless
Yeah.
it's very much a thing of like, if a guy comes at you and he's got a gun, then do you know what? You don't have to be John Wick about it. Just give the brother what he
Yeah.
wants. Just give the brother what he wants. And I think something that is so important when you teach weapon work is, and I made this metaphor previously, it doesn't take your chances of survival from 0 to 100. It's so important to understand that these techniques take you from like a 5% chance of survival to a 10% chance of survival, maybe a 15% chance of survival.
Yeah.
If you're lucky, it's one of those where it comes back to the preemption. So much of any martial art, if it's something that you feel you need to take to the streets or need to have in your toolbox when you go out onto the streets, and it's not just something you're doing for fitness, needs to be coupled with awareness. You need to be able to preempt these things. When it comes to the knife
Absolutely.
arts, is that person carrying a weapon? Does he keep posturing? Does he keep checking his pockets specifically? Is he walking in a way that would suggest he's carrying a weapon? All of these things need to be drilled appropriately for you to understand. And it kind of comes back to the general rule of you should never start a fight, because you never know all of the
Yeah.
odds. Is that guy carrying a weapon? Is that guy, have you completely misread something and not seen him, and you've accidentally started on the Bellator champion of the UK at the present time? You don't know. Like, have you, is this guy a mixed martial arts genius? Is he fifth down black belt in karate and like that? You don't know what people are capable of. You don't know who they're with, how they're going to handle
Exactly.
themselves. And it is one of those where, with the weapon work, I have kind of consigned myself to like, this is a bit of fun. Not that I don't take it seriously,
Cool.
but like, this is something I get to bring out, like you say, every so often, maybe once every couple of months, to the people I train with, as just you see what you make of this, have this in your back pocket. Because if if somebody is carrying a knife, they have agency. You know, if you
Yeah.
were to go, if you happen to go down to the pub and somebody's talking a bit loud and somebody's trying to start fights, they're doing that because they're drunk or they've got something to prove or both, or that's kind of the reason. If somebody is on the street with a knife, with a bat, with a cane, with anything like that, they have a reason for doing so and they have agency behind engaging in fights. And so those are the moments where your awareness needs to be, without making too egregious a pun about it, needs to be razor sharp.
Yeah.
Because
It's interesting. You bring it back to the what's the best way of putting it? Like the awareness and all the other stuff. It generally is like the number one most important skill that you can have. Somebody that just wants to look after themselves, and the added bonus of knowing a martial art on top of that is really important too for a lot of people. But when you take it back to the bare basics, if you're able to avoid and de-escalate and be aware of the things that are going on in your surroundings, you don't necessarily need to be a master in knife defense. You don't need to be like a master in any form of martial art. There are plenty of people that are very, very capable of looking after themselves with not having to turn up to a martial art class ever. It's just interesting to see that so many people feel like they need to rely on a martial art specifically in order to get that kind of confidence. And I can understand why they might do it. When you look at actually what they're trying to get out of it, it's almost like counterproductive, because it'd be easier for them to just go straight up, why don't I just go to a self-protection course opposed to going for like 6 years of learning this one specific martial art. But nevertheless, though, a lot of schools do both. They'll teach both of those things alongside each other. But one of the things that really opened my eyes about the knife defense, especially, was watching the Ultimate Self-Defense Championship, season 1, and watching the Shank Tank episode. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting was, in my head, my preconceived notion was, these guys are experts. The guys that Rokas had got onto the show, they're all experts in their field. They know exactly what they're doing. I was like, this is going to be just an interesting interpretation of how to deal with a knife from each of them. And it was the complete opposite of that. And you had like guys going in there. I think they had to survive. Was it like 30 seconds? And I think the worst round.
It was like five rounds of 30 seconds, and it's like
that's it.
These guys are getting dragged to the floor and taking 20, 30, 40 stabs in 5-10 seconds.
And I think the worst one I saw was like 47 stabs or something like that.
Yeah. Completely. And I think it's one of those where that was a really good example, because I think out of the 5 guys and the 5 rounds, one guy had 1 round. 6 guys. I think it was I think it might have been Icy Mike. Had 1 round out of 5.
I can't remember.
He had 1 round out of 5 where it's not that he didn't get stabbed or cut. He had 1 round where the medical team looked him over and went, "You would have survived."
That was exactly it. He had been stabbed. I remember
He had been stabbed. He had been cut, and it's one of those things where, like, a knife is a fast, dangerous, horrifying implement in any hand, not just the wrong hands. And I'm making it sound really dire. I understand. I can understand, but it's kind of. I mean, if you look at that statistically, 6 guys, 5 rounds, you have a 1 in 30 chance statistically of walking away from a knife fight alive if you're an expert in martial arts.
Okay, but here's the catch though. Was the thing that he did necessarily because of his training, or was it something that he was doing based on his human nature? And this is the thing that I think is really, really important, is that there are plenty of things that we do as humans that actually are quite good at looking after us. And do you need years of experience in order to defend against a knife?
I don't think you do, if I'm being honest. There's a great video of I think it's like a corner shop in Russia, where this guy is trying to like rob the cashier at knife point, sorry, and this woman comes up to him and he's like, "What are you doing?" And he turns the knife on her, and she grabs the blade with her hands and rips it off him and starts chasing him around the shop with the knife. And like, that is such a counterproductive thing to do, because like one of the first things I would teach somebody is don't grab the sharp bit, because it's the sharp bit. Like, but it worked. Like, I think the synopsis of it was like, she was admitted to hospital with minor lacerations. minor lacerations. So it's one of those things like, well, yeah, she grabbed something sharp, she will have cut her hand, but she then immediately completely robbed the attacker of his tool, completely took all of his confidence away from him, chased him out the shop. Nobody was hurt. Nobody well, aside from unfortunately, her with her hand.
Yeah.
Nobody was wounded. Nobody was killed. Everyone got away safely, including the attacker, which I think is again something that is important to put contextually. Like, the attacker got away unscathed. The people he was attacking got away unscathed. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was broken. And all it cost this woman was a hospital trip, and not in the back of an ambulance, by the sounds of it. So I think you make a valid point there of how much of that was just human nature. The counterpoint I'd like to make to that maybe is, are these guys trying to deal with the knife the way they deal with a striker or a grappler? Because I remember reading an article probably about 2 years ago where it was like, 5th Dan black belt stabbed in central London, and everybody immediately got on their computers and they got on Facebook and they were like, you see, karate is completely useless. A 5th Dan black belt, somebody who should have been a master of the art, was immediately defeated by one punk with a knife. And it's like, okay, unfortunately, yes, but in his however many years of training, in his however many gradings, in his however many black belts, did he train against a blade? Because
Yeah,
you could
exactly.
be the best person, you could be the best striker on the planet. You could be a world championship boxer or an Olympic medal karateka, and you could come up with something that you've never faced before, and you're like, well, the only thing I know how to do is punch this guy in the head. I'm being
Yeah.
I'm aware I'm being slightly pejorative, but it's kind of
No.
if he had tried to, maybe if he'd have tried to treat it more as I just need to get this guy out of commission, and less of a, right, I'm going to fall back to my self defense. I'm going to fence, because I think something I've talked about with you. You fence against somebody with the open hands, you can immediately, there's reactionary. They try and clear, and then you can counter. They try and shove through, and then you can do something to them. They try and posture off, and then you can kind of follow them in that instance. If you put your hands out to somebody with a knife, he's just going to slash your arms, because he can,
Yeah,
because
it's true. Yeah.
he doesn't need to worry about, right, I need to make sure that I'm not taking too much damage, so I'm going to move the arms to get that's not an issue for somebody with a weapon.
No.
And so you completely change the dynamic, because even when we do our self-protection drills and we do our fencing, there's the understanding of the mechanic of, you put something in the way because now somebody needs to deal with what you've put in the way. And for somebody with no weapon, that's I need to clear, I need to grab, I need to maneuver, to which there is a counter. Whereas with a weapon, it's just like, oh, thank you for both of your arms. Swip, swip, swip. They're both out of commission. And now I get to do whatever I want to you, and you're bleeding out while I do it.
Yeah.
I'm aware there's a grim way of looking at it, but it's kind of it's about, have you actually been shown? Have you actually been taught how these things work? Have you done something? Because on a, it's really easy to be like, oh, you're a karateka. Why didn't you kick him? Did he have room? Did he have time? Did he know the guy was there? Did he know the guy had a knife? All of these questions, all of these what ifs, are what make up our self awareness and our self
Sure.
protection as a result. I think it's one of those where the unfortunate state of things is there's no such thing. And we see this with open hand drills as well as with weapon work drills. There's no such thing as just live enough.
No.
Any amount of live in a controlled environment is by definition not live.
Of course,
And
there's
like
limitations.
you could literally say like, right guys, we're going for a full live session. We're going full on animal mode. No pads, no gloves, no gum shields. But I still want everyone to go home at the end of the day. Then you're not training live. That's not a street fight.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely. This is
yeah,
interesting. Sorry, the only reason I interject here is just because the biggest question that I've got for you, and this is just because I've never experienced it. You talk about, your experience of doing weapon work and doing weapon drills and, learning all that kind of stuff from those guys in Coventry. But would you say that you ever had the opportunity to train any of those weapon things you specifically did under live conditions? Do you think that's something that is done largely in the weapon community?
I think there's people that do it, but again, it's are you training these things live, or are you training these things as live as you can? The
Okay.
first instance that comes to mind is the Dog Brothers up in, I believe, Pembrokeshire. So they are an eskrima school who advocate for live stick sparring. And they
Okay.
are,
Yep.
and so what they do is, so they do like single, double stick. They do a variety of things, but they do them with gloves and with fencing masks on. Now, the reason that's done is, again, for the protection of the students. You don't want broken cheekbones, broken jaws, broken noses, broken eye sockets, people losing teeth, people losing ears, that kind of thing. Similarly, what good is a martial art if you have to stop every month because you've broken another set of fingers? That's not how you
Yeah.
learn anything. And this is kind of very much in line. Obviously, there's no real way to do knife sparring or blade sparring completely live and there be no risk. So
Awesome.
it's kind of things like I've seen. It's obviously you mentioned USDC with Rokus Leo. Um, Very excited to be meeting him in April, by the way.
Oh, absolutely. That's gonna
Thank
be
you for
awesome.
organising that.
Oh,
Um,
100%. Yeah.
so what I think, so like you can take a marker pen and that simulates a knife. You can have knives that you can paint knives with marker pen or with just straight up paint, and those marks made by the knife then simulate cuts and strokes and things like that. I have absolutely no idea what you call, but there are these training knives that you can get that basically they light up and they make a noise every time they feel a certain amount of impact and they feel a strike or a cut. So it's very much you have an audio and a visual cue of you have been cut, you have been hit, you have been done. But the thing is, like, when you spar with somebody hand to hand, there's two things that stop the fight. Either the bell goes off, or you start to gas. You start to lose energy. You start to kind of get like, do you know what? I don't think I can fight as effectively now because I'm starting to lose energy. I'm starting to get tired. I don't have as much energy to put into my strikes. I don't have as much energy to put into my kicks. I mean, for those of you who practice it, everyone knows that groundwork, if you don't really do groundwork, a minute on your back is 10 minutes on your feet easily.
100%. Yeah.
If you take this into live knife sparring, the second you get cut, you're losing blood. Something that you should never, something that should never happen on the mats in a controlled environment. But in the sense of like live sparring, like if somebody turned around to me tomorrow and was like, "Oh, I want to do this I want to do this knife defense course. It's going to be live blades, no pads, no nothing." I would be immediately out because the whole point of these things is you want to be able to go back tomorrow. You want to be able to go back the week after. And with something like knife defense, there's no amount of live that is live enough. You can take the metal knives and you can go hell for leather, but if you don't want to, if you don't want to, if you don't want to break your training partner's arms, you don't want to have to break hands or anything like that. And I think this is kind of why it's a touchy subject, and I don't try and I don't kind of like advertise it too much, but it's one of those things where you look at the Shank Tank from the USDC season one. These guys, they're in their rash guards. They have knee pads on. They have elbow pads on. They have gloves on. They have helmets on.
Yep.
These are the best. These are the best in the market. These are designed to simulate the human body as much as possible. But that is the addendum on anything live, especially with weapons. You are simulating it as much as possible. If
I
you'd
think
have
that's
done
really
if you'd have done Shank Tank completely live, those six men would all be fucking dead. Like
yeah. Yeah.
that's the simple
Yeah.
fact of the matter. You can't do something like knife defense or gun defense completely live because then you'd have no students and you'd be in prison for a very long time.
Yeah. I think it's really important though that, like, although you might not be able to do everything completely live, I think it's very, very important that you at least try and hit all of those different points, if not separately. So if you need to, improve your ability to, let's just say, stab someone. I know, okay, it's not something we really practice a lot of, but if you want to improve your ability to stab someone, ideally you should be doing some sort of drill that allows you to thrust with a knife at full power. I'm assuming that's not going to be on a person, right?
You
Or
can,
if you're
yeah,
trying to deal with
completely.
the adrenaline side of self-protection, you need something that simulates the drill that brings up your adrenaline. And I think this is sometimes one of the issues that I find, and I don't think this is like limited to any specific martial art. I think a lot of martial arts do this, is we get stuck in the drilling. And I think drilling is great because it teaches technique and it teaches you how to move effectively. It teaches you positioning. It can teach you footwork. It can teach you all those kind of things. However, what it doesn't teach you is how to deal with things on the spot, how to flow, how to, like, okay, well, that hasn't worked. I need to do something else. If you only drill, you're going to be like, well, the drill has not worked. I have failed as a martial artist.
Well,
And
and
I
this is
think,
it. This is completely it.
yeah,
Like, if you get to a point where you're just engaging in one very specific kind of drill, then I'm not saying you won't develop your coordination. I'm not saying you won't develop your footwork. I'm not saying you won't develop your strength. But there is an element of how do you then equate that to an actual scenario?
yeah,
So like
yeah, absolutely.
when the British Army train their soldiers to use a bayonet, they use a sandbag because that's what it feels like to stab something. That's how much force it takes to pull out again, and it's kind of that kind of thing. I saw there was a guy doing. He was basically saying like when you do your nut, are you being lazy with your cutting edge? Do you have a cutting edge that you can actually use? So basically, what he was doing was he was taking, I think it was like loins of pork, and he was putting them into the pockets of like an old pair of jeans, or like putting them under an old pair of jeans, and he was cutting. And it was basically like, is my edge alignment correct? Am I cutting with the right amount of force? Am I cutting with the right amount of pressure? And he was then kind of going like, okay, so it cut the gene. Did it actually cut through the pork? Did it cut through the skin? Did it cut through the meat? Did I get where I'm going? And he was going through, a range of strokes and a range of thrusts, and kind of understanding like, am I doing everything? Am I actually being able to applicate everything that I'm doing? Now, this is kind of again where you kind of start to get a bit too crazy with it, because as you very rightly said, you shouldn't really be you shouldn't really be training to slash somebody up. But and I'm sure you said, when I teach my knife defense, it's very much like, this is in case you end up with a knife, or you end up with the knife, and you don't want to just immediately lose it again to an attacker you might not have put down. It's very much, oh, so this control here, I would use it as a neck control. You hook behind the head, and you use the fact that you've got a solid item in your hand to pull down, control the head, move from there. You also have to understand that the original intent of this movement is a strike into the side of the neck. Now, obviously, I don't want the people I teach to go around and think the second I'm in danger, I can stab somebody in the side of the neck with this. No, you need to just not surrender a weapon, if that kind of comes down to it. There was a story of like an Aikido guy in Japan. He would do a lot of knife defense stuff with his students, and he got complacent in the sense of, okay, bang, drill's done, here's the knife, let's go again. Okay, drill's done, bang, here's the knife, let's go again. He got attacked on the street. Somebody came out with a knife. He threw the guy, took the knife, and then just held it. And the guy immediately just wrestled it straight off him. And unfortunately, the guy died. Really sad story. And the really sad thing about it is it's a lesson in complacency.
Yeah,
And it's, as you say, it's a lesson in, if you're going to drill a disarm with a knife, drill holding the knife, drill shielding it away from your attacker so they can't have it back, drill throwing it away. It's not as safe as necessarily you having the knife, but if it means that neither of you have it, the mentality of it would indicate that
absolutely.
the 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 psychology of a lot of attacks is, as soon as somebody who attacks you with a weapon loses that weapon, that confidence just shrinks right down, and they really take the time to evaluate, am I actually going to stand up on this on a much fairer playing field. I won't go as far as say a fair playing field because there's no such thing on the street, but a fairer playing field. And a lot of these guys just decide, no, actually, I needed that
Yeah.
weapon to feel confident. I needed that weapon to feel in control of this situation. And now that I don't, now that I'm having to weigh up my options, I've got to go. I'm going to book.
So yeah, I totally agree with that. Is you've got to train it in the right way. And your training has to be indicative of what you're trying to get out of the martial art, I think. So if you're somebody that's specifically looking to start martial arts for a self protection reason, you need to be checking that that's what your club is actually training for, and that's what they're actually providing you. One of the best quotes I've heard, I don't know if it originated with Ian, but I think he heard it from somebody else. I'm not sure. And this is Ian Abernethy I'm talking about, one of the leading practical karate guys in the UK. He said, "You will never rise to the level of your martial art. You will always fall to the level of your training when in these kind of situations." And it really suggested a lot to me because it's like if I look back at where I started in karate, the level of my training, I would have just stood in front of them and done a kata. And I know there's plenty of memes online, and I'm sure you've seen some of this stuff. Is like, I know Taekwondo, don't worry, and you just see them doing like the beginning of the basic form in front of the guy with a knife. And it is kind of true though, is that like you've got to be training self protection based drills, ones that are actually using a live form of training, one that gets your adrenaline up, one that uses the kind of like the messiness of combat. However, obviously, like we talked about, there's another side to that, though. There's the side of things where you can't train everything because you will run out of training partners. And you'll have people that are like just doing the martial art for the fun of doing a martial art. They don't want to go home every week with 2 black eyes, a broken kneecap, and they've been gouged. You know what I mean? It's
100%.
just interesting to kind of find that middle ground with it. And I know there's plenty of people that do it really, really well. And Ian once again talks about it as a training matrix of like a set of different skills that are different attributes that, when put together, become a complete system. That could be bag work for power generation. It could be slow live training of like certain things that are done in a slightly safer way that allow you to still get the base principle of what you're trying to do without actually doing it. I think that's a really good thing that a lot of martial arts can do better. Particularly in the self defense, self protection side of things. It's really important that you're hitting all those points and you're not just hitting one or two. And I think in general, that's where most martial arts go wrong when looking at self defense. Is they only teach a few drills or a few techniques, and they go, here's your magic technique that will get you out of all these situations. And that's my general experience of knife defense before meeting you, Pat, and like doing other things, and you show me a screamer and stuff. I got taught like, here's a technique to disarm a knife. And when you're a kid and you've been taught that, you're like, okay, this is what I should do. Looking back, I'm just like, if I'd have ever tried that, I'd have had my throat slit. So it's just really interesting.
I think again, it's taking that kind of it's taking that time and to kind of examine your art through a non-biased, non-critical viewpoint, and go like, say I went, we're doing karate now. Say I turned up on day one, and you went, here's the technique to punch the head, and I'd be like, there's more than one, friend. Like, and I think it's the same thing of like a lot of clubs who, through no fault of their own, I can understand that unless you are somebody who's really invested in making yourself this kind of all round martial artist, this all round fighter, they are going to be like, I know 3 self defense, I know 3 techniques that deal with a knife. Here's all 3 of them because I haven't got anything else for this lesson, kind of thing. And I think it's kind of again that catch-22 of, realistically, if you're going to go out onto the street and you're going to feel safe, do you need anything more than a good jab and a good cross and a good hook? Maybe, like if that's really, and it's kind of, do you need to know 100,000 techniques? Do you need to know every possible way to deal with an aggressor? Do you need to be able to come at somebody from 35 different angles and know groundwork and know how to get up on your feet and know how to do spinning tornado kicks and know how to fight with a pair of machetes and things like that? Like, is how much of that is kind of relevant to these situations. Um, and I think it's just one of those things where my only advice for people who are looking at weapon-based self-protection is, I don't want to be rude and say something like don't half-arse it, but more you have to take it seriously. But what I found was by taking it seriously, you'll have a lot of fun because the
Absolutely.
guys that teach knife defense, these Filipino guys, the Krav Maga guys, they're good people and they want to have fun and they want to do something they love just as much as you do. Um, but it's one of those things where like if we're drilling and we're doing a like, defending a combo of punches. If you let one through, you take a shiner on the nose or you get clipped. You brush it off, don't you? You kind of go like, no, fair one, dude, you got it through. If something like that happens in a weapons based scenario, I'm not saying agonize over it. I'm not saying lose sleep over it, but in the moment, take that moment to go, crap, that got through. That could have been really dangerous in a live situation. How do I prevent that happening again? Is it my arm minutia? Do I need to move my head a bit more? Do I need to make sure that arm is there and it's stable? Something like that. Because for every story I hear about, you know, karate black belt stabbed in London, I hear another story about like some old Chinese lady chasing off an attacker with a machete. It's kind of it's one of those
Yeah.
things where like these, like you say, it's very much the fine line between human nature and martial practice. Is where does it come down to? Because in all honesty, if somebody attacks you with a knife, then there's no amount of live that you can train that situation in from both perspectives. Because if somebody threatens you with a knife and they don't want something, they don't want and they don't want your wallet or your keys or your money, if they want something, if they want to harm you on a physical level, and they don't just want to steal from you, and they are going to do that one way or another, then you give them absolutely everything you've got. You don't worry about the consequences. I know that's a really harsh stance to take, but I know I've said this before. I think if it's one of those situations, it's a horrible situation to imagine. It's a horrible idea to have in your head, and it's not something you should take with you to training, to the mat, through everyday life. But at the end of the day, I would always rather get a phone call saying Jack's gone away for the GBH than Jack's in the hospital morgue because some guy tried to stab him up in the street and it didn't go well. It's a really harsh line to walk, and it's something that for a lot of reasons I don't really see a lot of people talking about online, because it's a dark and dreary line of thinking, and it's not something that I think has a lot of place on the map, because you shouldn't be afraid. Martial arts, I believe, is something that you undertake to understand yourself, to get more confident, to become a more relaxed person, because, as I've said in a previous episode, people that know how to fight don't start them.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I can agree with that. I think it's interesting. I take a similar stance with you. Like when you say you'd rather get a phone call of somebody's been been arrested or whatever it might be for something like that. I can definitely understand that. I think especially whenever it's life risking situations, I can't agree more. It's like if you've got somebody that's genuinely trying to end your life, you can't take that situation unseriously, and you can't not bring intensity. You need to fight like your life depends on it, because funnily enough it does.
It
And
does.
you need to be hitting that person that hard that in the circumstance that you land it right, they never get back up. However, I think the only thing that I would add to that would be that all of the legal stuff and all of the so that like, what are the laws within our area about self-defense, what are our rules about self-protection, not self-protection, preemption, what are reasonable levels of force, a witness perception, all of that kind of stuff needs to be done before you kind of like go out into the world and experience that. Ideally, you need that stuff needs to be happening either in your schooling, it needs to be happening in your dojo or dojang or wherever you train. Those things need to be explained to you so that you don't, first of all, don't put yourself into situations where you're around people that are likely to have knives. But second of all, is that you need to have those thought processes going on way before you ever come up against anything like that. because then you're not going to make poor decisions in the moment. Like, as an example, like, you might punch the guy, might have had a knife. You might have been lucky enough that he's only just caught your arm, hasn't stabbed you, but you've been slashed. You decide, panic, hit him once, he goes to the floor, and then because you're in that state of panic, you decide to curb stomp him 6 times. Now, to me, that's unreasonable levels of force. Yes, this guy's tried to end your life potentially, but that doesn't give you the right to take his when you now have an advantage.
No, I would completely agree, and I think that comes down to, again, trained properly. Any martial art trained properly is there to develop your sense of self control, and I think this is very much it. Like, say you manage to avoid, this confrontation, you manage to, like, knock the guy down. Like, it's very much like, okay, you need to be able to go in the moment, split seconds, fractions of seconds. You need to be able to immediately fall into, right, where is the weapon? Secure that. Make sure that's not in his reach. Okay, this guy's here. Do I need to secure him? Do I need to hit him again? Do I need to secure that? These are all decisions that will come with proper weapon training, and will enable you to go in the moment. Is this something I need to be doing? Is the weapon still a threat? Immediately neutralize that. Is the guy still a threat? Neutralize that. Has anyone seen me? Do I need to be working on witness awareness and the control of that? Do I need to be the one to call the police? Do I need to be the one to call the ambulance in this situation? What has happened? And it's one of those things where I was very lucky enough to attend a seminar that Mo Teague was also attending. I mean, this guy, he's the Don of martial arts. Really, really seasoned practitioner, excellent at what he does. And he spoke briefly at the instructor's request to engage in this kind of knife defense, and he did. And he gave a very short speech, very concise, very nice, easy drills that he was kind of giving us. And he was basically saying, if you are serious about your weapon work, firstly, you should be first aid certified, because you need to know what happens if this stuff goes wrong, be it on yourself or another person. And secondly, you need to know the laws of your state. For the UK, you need to know pretty much off by heart, pretty much so that you can quote it off the screen. You need to know Section 3 of the Criminal Self Protection Act. You need to know what your laws in your area are. Are you allowed to have that knife? Is this guy allowed to have this knife on him? Are you allowed to now carry that knife? If you need to neutralize this weapon, this kind of thing. And it's one of those things where, fortunately, I don't think we live in an area where these kinds of crimes are prevalent
Or
in a
no.
context. But I heard just the other day, really sad story of, there's been a 14-year-old boy stabbed in the center of Birmingham. Horrible story.
Yeah.
Can't imagine being in that situation at all. But it's one of those things where, like, you really, really try not to be a scaremongerer when you know these kinds of arts, and you know these kinds of practices, and you like teaching these kinds of things, because you don't want to be putting out ads for a club being like, have you seen there's been another stabbing, you need to come and learn knife defense, because
No, 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 no.
you're attracting through fear. Like anything, people learn martial arts for a variety of different reasons. I will hold my hands up and say I gravitated into these martial arts because I wanted to do something that I couldn't get in my local area. I wanted to do something different. I wanted to do something outside of the box. And I'm lucky in the sense of I found something that I really gravitated to and I really fell in love with. And some people might be coming to your club, whatever you teach, whatever your style, they might be coming to a club because they want to get fit. They might be coming because they want to learn something new. They might come because they want to learn a new skill. They might be coming because something's going on in their life and they feel threatened and they don't want to feel like that anymore. It really can, it's a number of reasons. And it's like I say, the people who do this weapon work, I've found really lovely people, and
Oh yeah.
none of them are going, oh, I'm learning this so that I can go out to the local pub, and the next time somebody starts on me, I'm going to slice him up. No way, not happening. I would always be an advocate, but I'm also going to say, anything you see online, especially anything you see online, but anything you see online, anything that you do in your clubs, anything you want to bring into your clubs, take it with a pinch of salt. I don't. even as somebody who was a massive advocate for, even somebody who has a massive love for it, especially in countries where legal carry isn't a thing, like the UK. I don't think it should be at the forefront of your practice. I think it should be something you bring out once a month, once a fortnight, practice, go over, equate it to your open hands, because that's what I do when I teach, because that is a good way to kind of make sure it's in there, but it's also a good way to make sure that you're not kind of dead drilling, as we've been talking about. You're not doing a drill that's not going to serve you in the future.
Awesome. That's really interesting, Pat. I think it's always really great to talk to you about this stuff because we both come from very, very different experiences of martial arts, and it's nice to be able to see the similarities and differences that we share based on our experiences. But I think one of the big takeaways from today, for me at least, is that as instructors, we have a huge responsibility to our students to first of all be really upfront about what we teach and what our aim is. And particularly if you're trying to instruct for self-defense or you're claiming you teach self-defense, even more so knife defense, because that generally is even more so life or death than other self-defense situations like grabbing or punching or whatever it might be. You have a massive responsibility to make sure that the stuff that you're doing is backed up and is definitely going to serve the people that you're teaching to actually benefit their lives if they should need it.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
Okay.
Thank you for another great conversation, Jack.
No, always a pleasure.
Whereabouts can we find you online?
You can find me on Instagram or at Cotswold Karate School, where we share stuff from the club. We share what we're doing seminar-wise. You can also check us out on the website, which is linked on the Instagram too. But if in case you don't know, it's cotswoldkarateschool.com. And how about you, Pat? Where can we find you?
You can find me on Instagram at Good Medicine Martial Artist.
Okay. Well, fantastic. Yeah. Thanks again, Pat. Great to talk to you.
And you, mate. And thank you, everyone at home, for listening. Catch you next time.
Take care. Bye-bye.